Teammates are like oxygen.
Beautiful.
They can pump you up
Yeah!
or calm you down. Teammates stand proud with you, so you can finally exhale. And the best teammates never let you forget to breathe.
For more than 60 years, Symetra Life Insurance Company has helped people breathe a little easier. With retirement, benefits, and life insurance products, Symetra is your teammate for whatever lies ahead.
For every kid that didn't have a chance, and every kid that was out of options, Seattle Children's is fighting for you. Because this isn't about beating the odds. It's about changing them for all kidkind.
Hello, my name is Laura Kastner, and I'm happy to join Parent Ed Talks as your series moderator. I'm a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Washington. I'm the author of scientific articles and 5 books on child development and parenting for parents. I have a clinical practice in which I see children and couples and families. Parent Map is thrilled to have put together a pool of some of the best parenting media in the country: Chicago Parent, Metro Parent, New York Family, and Staten Island Parent, to bring you the Parent Ed Talk series. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have an event entitled Nurturing the Healing Power of Play for Ourselves and for Our Children with Amelia Bachleda and Michael Browne. Speaking on behalf of Parent Map and our magnificent parenting media partners across the country, I want to emphasize that it is our collective passion to build inclusive, safe, educated, and loving communities for our families. We are laser focused on this goal and never suffice it to say, settle for the second best status quo. Before we kick off learning with Michael and Amelia, please take a moment to let us know what city you're joining from, and please put your answers into the Zoom chat. It's always fun to see where people are coming from. Oh, actually, this is the registration poll. We're finding out where people are coming from with their registration. Okay, different poll. Thank you so much for doing that. Amelia is a child development and specialist from the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, and Michael Browne is the director. I'm sorry, my scroll isn't working. Michael Browne is the Senior Director of Community Engagement for Cultivate Learning at the University of Washington. Please join me in welcoming Amelia and Mike, and know that even though the presentation is much longer than we usually have here, they've incorporated your questions, a lot of your questions, into their presentations.
All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening. I got to check the time. I don't even know what time it is right now. It looks like I just woke up because my hair is a mess, but we are doing well. I'm coming from you. My name is Mike Browne. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement, as they mentioned, but I'm so much more than my title. I play trumpet. I play a little bit of piano. I didn't say I do it well. I just said I play it. And I am a former Tyler teacher that moved into doing professional development and other work. And I'm just excited to be here. And I'm joined by the wonderful Amelia.
Hey, hi, everybody. So nice to be here. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. My name is Amelia Bachleda, pronouns she, her. I'm the Director of Outreach at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. Yeah, I like to, what else do I love to do? I love to dig in the dirt, chase my toddler around, make some art, all sorts of great stuff. Super excited to have this conversation today.
I love it. So we got about 60 minutes worth of convo, and we only got 50 minutes in order to get this in. But don't worry, I'm from New York originally. I see someone was from Brooklyn. I see you out there. My gente, mi gente, my people. So we're going to talk real fast. But it's very important today that we have engagement. Right now, I only get to see Amelia's face on the screen. So we're going to need a lot of engagement during the chat. And now is your perfect time to actually kind of get started and see how well we going to engage and interact today. And we got some that I want to start us off with and just kind of warm us up. It's called a chat storm. Now, if you ever been to a chat storm, you know what this is. Basically, you got a chance to hear a series of either or questions, right? It could be a yes or no. It could be pick one of the options or other. And what you're going to do is you're going to type it into your answers into the chat box on Zoom, but you're not going to press enter. You're not going to press send yet, right? Until you're instructed to. That's a very important thing because a lot of people mess this up. So I'm wondering who's it going to be? Who gonna mess this up today first, right? And then on the count of three, we're all going to populate the chat all at once. Y'all got it? I hope so. I don't know. I can't see any faces, but we just gonna roll with this. Right. The first question is, all right, do you want something that's sweet or do you want something that's salty? Right? Think about it. It's 2 a.m. You rummaging through the fridge. You know you shouldn't be, but you rummaging through the fridge and you're like, I want a snack. Do I want something sweet or salty? All right. See, someone already messed up. Someone already wrote into the chat, right? Don't press enter yet. Put it in your mind. You got it in your mind, right? It's either or question. Start typing, but don't press return or enter or whatever's on your keyboard yet. Got it? All right. Sweet or salty? I think that's enough time. So on the count of three, we're all going to populate the chat all at once. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Y'all got this. Okay. Y'all smart. Okay, we working with some smart people today, Amelia. I love this. Let's see. I'm going to say, what do you think? I think it's about 50-50 or which one do you think, Amelia?
Oh, man. I think, yeah. I mean, maybe sweet might be edging out just a little bit. Just might be edging ahead, but it's pretty close.
It's pretty close. I'm gonna tip it into the favor and I'm gonna go with sweet because you should see my cabinets right now. It's a mess. All right. So here's our next question, kind of warm us up. All right, you're doing something illegal in the car and you're about to be in trouble. Would you rather get a speeding ticket or would you rather get a parking ticket? A speeding ticket or parking, both of them suck, right? Let's not. And in our cities, right? We come from San Diego. A lot of people are coming from Seattle. It's like $100 fine, right? And so would you rather have a parking ticket or a speeding ticket? I didn't say 3 yet, but it's okay. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Parking one. Is it because it's cheaper? Oh, that's why. All right. Someone said parking, duh. Okay, we're gonna be friends. You don't have to talk to anyone. That is very sure. Insurance doesn't go on your record. So we got a couple lawyers in here. I might contact me a little bit later. All right. All right. We all live maybe in a neighborhood. We live in apartment buildings. We maybe live in a house. Wherever your housing structure might look like, whatever you call home. I got a question for y'all because I got one on my left and one on my right. The one on my right is a loud neighbor and the one on my left is a nosy neighbor. So which one would you rather have, a loud one or a nosy one? All right, we're going to do this on a count of 3, right? 1, 2, 10. I didn't say 3, I said 10. But okay, go ahead, type it into the chat. We got this.
You're really testing our executive function here. This is great. We're playing a brain game.
Amelia, what would you rather have? Nosy?
Nosy, I think, because I'm nosy, so I want to know what's going on. I appreciate it. That's okay. Ask me what's going on.
I love it. All right. Thank you everyone for getting us warmer. We're going to get into our presentation, but just to kind of round us out, I'm not going to count to 3. I'm just going to move to our next slide, but just tell us, how are you entering today's space? How are you entering today's space? Give us a 1-word answer on how you're feeling. And on that note, I'm going to pass it off to you, Amelia.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. I think my word is excited. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm loving seeing all of the ways that you're entering this conversation with us. You know, you could be feeling excited, you could be feeling sad, you can be feeling however you want. We're just really glad that you're here with us today. So we are going to be talking all about play. And I thought I'd get us kicked off with this quote from Fred Rogers, which is one of my favorites, right? Play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning, but for children, play really is serious learning. And we're going to be talking a lot about this idea today, and Mike is going to expand on this more in a bit. Play creates this amazing space for learning, and we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to get into it even a little more. Play is deeper than that. It's deeper than learning, and I hope we spend some time together in conversation thinking about how fun and joyful play is, but also really how essential it is to our life, to dreaming, and I think we're going to make the argument even to our survival. We can go on to the next slide. So I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I love to think about the brain. So I'm going to help us think a little bit about play in the brain to get started here, right? There's something really interesting about play in the brain. There is a researcher, not from iLabs, who has studied play for years. His name is Jaak Pankseep, and he really wanted to know, where does the drive for play come from in the brain? Is it in this outer part of our brain, the neocortex that is in that sort of dark teal? That's where we use all of our sort of higher order thinking, those cognitive flexibility skills that Mike was testing us out on earlier. Or is it deeper in the brain, kind of coupled near some of our emotional centers and the drive for survival? And what he found is that play really is located, that drive for play is really located deep, deep in the brain. It's not that we don't use the other parts of our brain too, but that drive to play, it's deep in our brain. Play is a fundamental part of our biology. It's part of who we are. It's essential to our lives. And across the natural world, we see play everywhere, right? All mammals play, birds play, and there's a new study that I read that even insects play. Can move on to the next slide. So play is universal, right? All children play in every culture, but how we play really looks different and it varies. And I think this is important to keep in mind, right? So if we say something, you're like, hey, I don't play that way, that doesn't resonate with me, that's fine. Play is really diverse, right? It changes between families, cultures, regions, geographic regions, ages. Our cultural views of play may be different, right? What is defined as play? What's the role of play? Mike and I have our perspectives. You may have a different perspective. Thinking about how adults engage in play with children, right? In some cultures, maybe we're rolling around on the floor with children. In some cultures, maybe play is something that children do on their own. Are we thinking about individual play or group play? How expressive or restrained are we in play? How competitive are we or inclusive? All of these ways are ways that play varies. And in all cases, in play, children reproduce and recreate and reflect their cultural environment. I think that's the key piece to keep in mind. So regardless of how children are playing, right, there's this one thing that play really has in common. And that's that it helps us learn about the social world. And if there was one takeaway that I could share with you from iLabs that I think is really key, is that how critical and often overlooked our social brains are. We learn best from other people in social settings. And babies in particular and toddlers, they need that back and forth interaction to learn. But I think all of us, I know all of us also learn best in this back and forth interaction. And it's the best way to learn something. Play, if you think about it, provides this marvelous social landscape to engage in and learn all of these skills, right? If you're thinking about a child playing, what are they doing? They are taking different perspectives, they're taking on different roles, they're maybe negotiating different desires, maybe they're practicing some self-restraint, maybe they're not. Often they're going to be talking about emotions, cooperation, turn-taking. Play has it all. But for all of us, play creates the space to be curious. And this playful curiosity is a really powerful way that we learn about the world around us and our place in it. So as we keep going today, we hope that you'll be playful with us. You already have been as we explore this topic together and, maybe even get a little uncomfortable.
That was my cue to start talking. So yes, uncomfortable indeed, and I'm excited. I'm really excited for that. Why? Because discomfort is where the growth actually lies. In fact, research actually states that the idea that this discomfort that we might feel is actually a catalyst for growth. And it's actually pretty fitting that our children are growing exponentially every single day. And so I think that's really fitting, especially as we look at our goals as adults, and trying to see ourselves as almost trying to keep up with young children. And so today's session is really an exercise in that. The session is really designed to intentionally and mentally and emotionally challenge you in ways that potentially have never been challenged before. And so these challenges are only really going to increase your potential to overcome obstacles in life and those achievements from our struggles. Albeit they're going to be difficult, right? They're really going to help us build our self-confidence and self-efficacy and ultimately help us further really harness this idea that we're trying to get to today, right? Harnessing the healing that we all need and we want. So we encourage you to really lean into it. And if at any time you are experiencing discomfort, don't run away from it, right? It's okay to step away, but come back and to really embrace it as an opportunity for growth. So that being said, I wanted us to show us this 3.5, 4-minute clip about the fear of decolonization, because that's essentially what we're trying to do today. We're really trying to dismantle our knowledge systems that are based off of settler and white supremacy and get back to restoring our ancestral freedom. We want to get back to our ancestral language, our ancestral relationships and respect. And so let's get a little bit uncomfortable with this clip, y'all.
I am the producing artistic director of Urban Theater Company in Humboldt Park, Chicago. I identify as a mother and a Blaxican. I have African-American and Mexican indigeneity mixed with the usual conquistador blood. I was born and raised in Chicago proper, and I have had an education through the Catholic lens for 16 years. I share all of this with you because it's important for you to know how I was socialized and give you just a glimpse of all of the things I had to unlearn over the last 25 years. And for those of you paying attention, I just gave away my age, and I never do that. The arts is the way that we show society what is possible. The arts sometimes imitates life and sometimes manifests it. And it's with that clarification that I say the following phrase. It's time to decolonize the arts, and that transformation is long overdue. What happened to your body when I just said that? No, really. What happened to your body when I just said the word decolonization? Did it tense up? Did it calm? When I say that phrase on panels or to funders or to clients in my consultancy, their bodies tell me where they're at in the work and their relationship to the word long before they voice it. In some instances, their eyes widen, their breathing changes, they purse their lips. In some cases, they take the deepest sigh, which tells me that they're ready to go forth into the unknown. But in most cases, their bodies physically react to me as if I threatened their life. It's a fear response. And it's the reason why I embrace taking a deep collective breath before digging into this work. So let's do it. Let's try that. Let's take a deep collective breath. Ready? The collective breath is the first step to releasing fear. It is the first step to making room for creativity. And making room for me is another word for holding space. And holding space is a skill I had to build slowly over decades. Learning to hold space is the groundwork for decolonization. And decolonization can only take place at the individual level, the self. The decolonization process is not a place. Many of my clients think that by taking a training or creating an affinity space or inviting more voices into the room that the work is done. So you can imagine their dismay when I say, what do you have in place in order to be sure that you are practicing this work every day for the rest of your lives? The decolonizing process, or decolonizing the self in order to decolonize a process, is swimming against the current. It is swimming against the way that we are conditioned in this country. It is centering counter narratives. It is disrupting power dynamics. It's honoring transparency. The decolonization process is relinquishing power and control. It is the continual death of the ego, and it is the deepest level of work. When I first began my time in the arts,
Sorry, y'all. Thank you. Technical difficulties. Well, we're doing this, right? And so Sister Gonzalez said something that was so profound, and I wanted to repeat it just one more time, right? She said that the arts is how we show society what's possible. The arts sometimes imitates life and sometimes manifests it. And the arts is probably what you traditionally think of, right? You probably thought of painting or sculpturing, but it's also drama. It's also filmmaking, writing poetry, dancing, theater, cooking. Have you ever noticed when you tell a child, leave me alone, go find something to do, go find something to play with, what do? They always go and they always find something within the arts, because art is play and play is learning. And so that art, that learning, that play they are engaged in imitates what they have seen, what they have heard, what they've smelled, what they've experienced in this world. Their play is how they make sense of their world. And what I hope, or what I've learned over the years, working with children, I guess you can't really call them children because it was college age, all the way down to 2-year-olds, is that if you really do allow them the freedom to play, it can manifest an entirely different world for them. Their play is often, which are often their dreams, is often their aspirations, their hopes, their desires out of this world, leads them to interpret, dissect, and really challenge the ideas of what it means to be a member of their community. And that's so powerful. It's authentic. It's raw. Their play is the manifestation of their inner voice. And so if you're listening to their play, you'll see what they're learning about their role in the world, and you'll learn about what they are learning. And that is the most beautiful thing ever. It's especially when their play is not dictated, it's not formed or constrained or constricted, especially as the way that schools are set up nowadays, right? It allows them to become, Greta Thunberg, right? It allows them, when it's not constricted, to be Bana Albert, to be Genesis Butler, and so much more. And so this is why it's so important for us to advocate for them to play. And play more than just the 45 minutes that they're allowed it in school, or when it rains and we go, oh, you got to get back into the classroom, right? Because we can't be outside because it's raining, right? And more than the hour or two they might get at home. And also, we as adults have to play with them too. So what I'm getting at is this, right? It's not time just to decolonize the arts, as Gonzalez said, but it's time to decolonize school and our learning environments. And what I mean by decolonize, I mean that we need to design our interactions, our environments, our systems, our attitudes, our policies, and everything that you're seeing on the screen, so that we're not forcing children against their will. We're not pushing them into obedience and subservience. We're recognizing that their minds, that their bodies, that their emotions, that their play has rights. And so then we treat them in humane and consent-based ways. And so play, and so we've done this before, y'all, right? This isn't new to us. Our ancestors before colonization, they learned through play because their play had a balance. It all had a balance. It had a balance of freedom and responsibility and diversity and cooperation. And that was all baked into a community of accountability. And that's what play used to be in schools. And I say schools to broadly say learning environments because learning can happen absolutely everywhere. Not a lot of people know that I got a PhD. It's from Bailey Phyllis University. And that's the corner that I used to play on, right, growing up. And some of the best lessons that I learned growing up about humanity, about brotherhood, about community building, about communication, about physical education, how to debate, how to engage, how I learned about economics was from the streets. I didn't learn that in school. But that's because I had that freedom to play. And that's what schools used to be, right? It used to be a place to cultivate play and imagination and thought. And maybe I'm painting with a broad brush, right? Not every school is like that. But I'm essentially getting at is that schools used to be like this before the Industrial Revolution. And since then, schools has then been replicated to be more like factories with products and processes, because children used to go right into the assembly line right after school. And so that's not to say that we need to scrape schooling the way that it's done nowadays. But the argument that we need to do as adults in our lives of children is to demand more play in our world, because it strengthens them. It strengthens these, traditional, that we like to call it, school subjects. And it creates an environment for learning that you really can't replicate or teach anywhere else. And so play is a powerful setting for learning. And through play, children build key skills that are critical for learning and lifelong success, because that's what we're going for. Not just kindergarten readiness, not just for the SATs, but for lifelong success. And so even one study, we got a whole bunch of studies, right, shows that free play, young children explore math concepts nearly 50% of the time. So they're doing this naturally. So the next time someone says, oh man, all they doing is play, you should be excited, because play offers such a rich context for exploring social relationships, creativity, problem solving, then learning the value of pi. 3.14 some. So play is a powerful setting for learning that builds key skills for critical self-consciousness, for school readiness, for lifelong success. And that could be with playing with blocks. It could be with hand games such as Miss Mary Mac. We bringing it back, right? It could be with drum sets, even though they might not be good with them, they just banging on stuff, right? It could be with raps, it could be with rhymes, it could be with anything, because if you think about it, they're learning how to count when they're playing with blocks. They're learning how to recognize patterns with hand games. They're learning fractions when they're doing drum sets, frequencies, intervals. All of this also helps with algebra. And so the same thing can be said for children who love to engage in fighting games. I know that's always a contentious topic, and I know it may seem conceptually different, but within, combat, karate, taekwondo, whatever that may look like, anything they might be replicating in your homes, is that they're also learning about algorithms in that. And it's strengthening their cognitive functioning skills. So when they're learning a new technique in martial arts, for example, they have to break it down and they have to learn the properties and relationships of things. And the same thing goes for math concepts. So it's about how we draw parallels between these things and let children know that, hey, there's a relationship between it all, and that might help them love and appreciate both of them rather than saying, I want this over the other.
As I'm thinking about everything that Mike is sharing with us, it really makes me think about, what is it that we need and children really need at this moment in time, right? We have a lot of challenges facing us. We always do, I think, and now there's this barrage of information that's available all the time, and it can be really difficult to make sense of. And we need to be able to think critically, creatively, to hold these multiple perspectives at once, to have genuine curiosity about the world and empathy for people in it, and be creative and innovative in our problem solving and in our relationships. And I also think we really need to continue to be able to tap into our sense of wonder and joy and connection, which ultimately help us all live these like really meaningful and resonant lives, right? So, there's no standardized test or worksheet that's going to help us build these skills, but play, like we're talking about here, and social, playful, hands-on learning really does help us get into some of those broader, more integrated skills, right? And children, you don't need me to tell you this, right? They're marvelously creative. Their brains, it's amazing. They're designed to make all sorts of new connections, right? And actual physical new connections. That's how we learn something. We make physical new connections between the cells in our brain. And children's brains, they're just not quite as set as adult brains are, right? They don't have as many expectations about how the world works because they don't have as many experiences. And that means that they can actually come up with more, research shows there are more creative solutions to certain problems than adults can, which I think is really cool. So there's this classic test in psychology. It's called the creative uses test. And the idea of it is pretty simple. Take an ordinary everyday object like a pencil, for example, and think of as many things as possible that this pencil could be. And why don't you go ahead and type some things in the chat if you want to. It's always good to practice creativity. Children are really good at the creative uses test, right? Because their idea of a pencil isn't as well formed, because their idea of the world and their experience of the world is just a little bit more fluid. They have this amazing period in their life where they can make so many new connections, right? This is a space we want to nurture. And play for us too helps us get back into that sort of like fluid state of possibility and openness and expansion, right? It's really valuable for us to tap into too. Creative isn't something that you are, right? I think we hear this all the time, especially as we get older. We're like, I'm not creative. Someone told me I'm not creative. Someone told me I couldn't draw, so I'm not creative. That's not true, right? Creative is something that you practice, right? Creativity is a skill that you practice. And there's research to show that people who regularly practice creativity actually use their brains in slightly different ways. And play, getting into that play state, is the perfect way to practice those skills. So as we're thinking about how important play is, I would love for you to take a second. I also really appreciate, I'm just gonna take a minute, look at all these amazing things that pencils could be. I love it. Take a second to reflect on the last time that you played was. And here's the kicker, not when you played with your children, if you have children, but played for you. I think playing with children, I have a toddler, joyful, amazing. But when did you play just for you? And I'd love for you to type that into the chat. And if you're, sort of at a loss, feel free to respond to any of these other prompts. So Mike, when was the last time you played?
It was honestly right before we jumped on here, and I almost forgot that we had a workshop. But I was sitting there and I was coloring. And I was like, wait, am I supposed to be doing something right now? And I was like, oh yeah, I gotta get ready. And so coloring, I did that maybe about an hour ago. What about you, Amelia?
That's great. Last night, I also did some drawing. It sounds like both of us really like to get into that sort of creative flow space by doing some art and creativity. Okay. Great. Yes, doodling counts, of course. I'm seeing a lot of, we are not alone in our coloring. I'm seeing like swimming, playing games. There's a few people here that I'm saying they can't remember. And if you're struggling to think about the last time you played, you are not alone. Why don't we go ahead and go on to the next slide. There are a ton of social and physical barriers to play. There just are, right? Of course, we are constrained by time and money, but I also think the roots of not playing, they're even a little like deeper than that, right? There are aspects of our culture and our physical surroundings that are built to actively repress play.
And, I'm thinking about the physical activity, because when I look at it, I think it's more about functionality. And because we're thinking about, I got to go to PT or anything like that, it inherently becomes less joyful as adults. I think more along that same lines about physical activity, it's socially contagious. But we often just, what do we do after we go to work, especially if we're going into the office? I'm like, all right, well, I see y'all. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going right back into my home. And so there's this lack of kind of a third place, community center, whatever that you want to call it, in our current culture, that, we don't have that time to connect with one another. And I think play is often described or viewed as a physical activity when it doesn't necessarily have to be. I was coloring last night. That's not physical. I mean, technically, maybe it is. It's use of my hands and arms, but I'm like, I didn't break a sweat. And then often the places that we gather at are often so domesticated, where play and movement are constricted, right? We got that precious thing that we bought. We don't want it to break, so nobody play in that area.
Totally. Yeah. I think there's so many things that we think about. And then, I think I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate, there's so many diversity of play in the chat. And I'm also seeing people that are like, I don't give myself permission to play, right? I don't have time. I feel guilty about it. And I think it's helpful to think about that play is not like a want. I think play is really a need, right? Play helps us bring joy to our lives. And sometimes I think at first, maybe you think that is selfish to pursue joy. But I think if we think we can all sort of think about this bigger picture, right? There's research to show that people who experience more joy, they're also the people that are often more willing to help others, right? Their tank is full, right? You have more willingness to engage in those difficult conversations. You're able to do some of that deep healing work that you may need to do, that all of us need to do, really. And so you can think about play as this sort of like real self-care, right? It's not blocking out the world, but it's allowing ourselves to engage in those activities that you truly enjoy, that spark creativity and joy, maybe physical motion, and help you spark new ideas and get into this flow space. And so as we're thinking about our own barriers to play, it's also important to think about, okay, how might we unintentionally be creating those barriers for children's play too, right? How might we be repeating or reinforcing those cycles for our children? So we're gonna think about 3 different areas: school, home, culture, right? Okay, so we've touched a little bit on school, right? School is really hard work for children. And what is school doing that might be recreating some of those aspects of like our work and our jobs that we don't like, right? Lots of worksheets, testing, very sort of linearly defined, like closely defined places. What can we do to sort of like expand that, right? And we may not in this room have the power to do that, but if we're thinking about school and play, right, it doesn't mean like, okay, 50% of the time is recess or free play, though that's really important too, right? We can think about like, how are we making more space for playful engagement? We know that we learn best in back and forth social interactions. How can we make the subjects that we're learning more social and playful? Things like science, art, right? Those are just rich for opportunities for engagement, for questioning, for curiosity. There's so many ways to engage children in this playful learning, right? And there's this quote that I love from educator Vivian Paley, who wrote and studied about play extensively, and I'll just sort of leave this for thought for you. She wrote, "Play is story and action, just as storytelling is play put into narrative form." I love that.
And so thinking about at home, what barriers do children face at home, right, to play? And so are there a lot of structure activities that you give them? And so where can we pare back the busyness of life and just exist? Where are there opportunities to follow children's interests? So much of our interaction with children, it's top down. And so maybe it could be okay to be a little less scheduled heavy and really savor those moments that children share with us as they just wonder about the world. Because remember, that warmth that they see could be the first time that they're seeing this. But what's more important, getting into our schedule and getting into whatever we need on time, or marveling in the beauty of the work? Where can we make space to have just more fun in general? And sometimes even too many toys can be overwhelming. Think about what open-ended things you have that children can use their imagination with, like a pencil. We don't necessarily tell them it's a pencil, but give them a pencil and a pipe cleaner or sticks or pebbles. They're really great. I'm going to drop into links some ideas of open-ended materials. And then when in doubt, go outside is always a great reset for everyone.
Totally. Outside is great. And, you know, any type of outside is good. Wherever is outside for you, that is great. And then finally, I think if we're thinking about culture, right? Like, how are we thinking about like play versus work, right? Where is our values, ideas about play, right? If we really think about play, are we feeling guilty when we play? Sometimes I feel guilty when I play still, right? So where did that come from? Why do I feel that way? Do we always feel like we have to be productive and doing something all the time, right? Possibly. And do we really want this for our children, for the children in our lives? What might be accidentally passing along to children, right? That busyness, that like need for productivity all the time. And when you think about children's life, and what do you hope for them? And how can we plant those seeds now?
And so just as we chatted up until this point, right? Because we have barriers to play, because we don't value play for our children, we as adults, we then grow up and we're very much socialized not to play either. We're told that play has a time and it has a place. And often those things are not here. And so if you think about it, our play is policed. And I know this because it sounds super similar to my scholarship around Black Boy Joy, because Black joy is often told the same thing. Therefore, our institutions can really be a source of harm for us. How? I'm glad you asked, right? There are many different ways in which we are socialized not to play, but I'm going to focus in on 3 of them right here, right now. Audience management. We remove potentially disapproving observers, AKA if we see someone playing in an area and we don't think belongs to them, right? Or we think they're playing in a place that we think is inappropriate, we then remove them from that area. A perfect example is a Central Park birdwatching incident that happened maybe a year or 2 ago, where a Black man was birdwatching and asked a white lady to put her dog back on her leash. She then proceeded to call the police, saying this man was threatening her and her dog, all because his presence, his joy, his play didn't align with her thoughts of who belonged, right? As well as who bird watches. We're all nestled, most of us might be nestled in the Pacific Northwest. We don't think necessarily of non-white people as hiking. And so when we see that, we go, oh, that's new, that's different. And so this video went viral. You have 2 thumbs. You can Google it if you're really interested in it later. Moving on to the next one, the middle picture is awareness management. We interrupt any chance for observers and players, so the people engaging in the act of play, to really see each other. We may see play happening, and then we set boundaries around that. We might physically separate people. We might intentionally stop the play from progressing any further. And then lastly is role distancing. We mock, we ridicule, and we parody the play itself so that participants watching can then distance themselves from it. In this example I have on the right-hand side is of the Miss Universe pageant, where contestants were mocking another contestant who had, English wasn't as strong, was not their first language, and they started to ridicule and mock them in order to distance themselves from them. So my question is, because I'm about to pull up a poll right here, right? That's my cue for my people in the background. Where do you see these things happening in your world? Where do you interrupt play, right? So it's really important to reflect on it. And here's a 1-question poll that we can get started in that reflection. So the question is, as that gets pulled up, it should be popping up on your screen any second now, is you see a group of young men of color laughing, joking, and browsing around a store in an affluent neighborhood. What is most likely your response or the response of that you've seen other people? Do they potentially remove disapproving observers because they don't belong there, so they engage in audience management? Do they try to interrupt this play? and they might try to intentionally stop it from progressing any further by any means they find necessary? Or do they mostly in your community roll distance? They'll start mocking them, maybe not to them to their face, but to other people around. So we'll take maybe about another 30 seconds, and then we'll see the results pop up. I'll let the people managing that close it in about 20, 25 seconds. So all this is to say is that it's gonna take some rewiring of our brains to think about play and how we can be socialized to play again. And so first and foremost, play can and will always look different. There is no one way to play, y'all. So we have a good split, right? We have a good split about, most people might see a little bit more awareness management, followed by audience management, and then role distancing. Thank you all for participating. And so what we might see with play taking different forms, we might see it as shooting paper into a wastebasket, right? Oh, I don't need this paper, I'm gonna crumple it up and I'm gonna throw it, and we yell out Kobe. It's playing fetch with my dog. I tried playing fetch with my dog earlier and he didn't want to play, so, well, all right, but that's play. I got to play. It could be hiking. It could be coloring, as we mentioned earlier. It could be playing jokes on one another. There's a show on Impossible Practical Jokesters or something like that. It was a group of friends that you find on whatever TV network. And it was a group of friends who just likes to play practical jokes on each other. And then they got rich off of that. And practical jokers, thank you. Yoga, it could be collecting things, right? That's all different types of play. So that's the first way. Secondly, play begins with us as viewing things as fun again. And even more so, less as functional. And then thirdly, we need to push back on what we believe is quote unquote socially acceptable. Because too often we pretend that we pretend to be a person that we're not. We pretend to be a person that we feel that the social situation demands or expects out of us. And so this means that we hide parts of ourselves and we leave parts of our identity at the door. Some of us are weird. It's okay, be weird. And so as we move on to the next slide, I really invite you to think about all the ways that you want to bring fun or play or joy back into your lives that society might see as socially unacceptable.
Absolutely. I love this idea of centering joy that might not seem totally socially acceptable, right? And I think there's even sort of like expectations about like how play, like capital P play, I'm going to say, should look, right? Like there's this sort of idolized version, right? But the last thing that I think I want you to do when you leave this webinar is to feel like I've got one more thing that I've got to do, right? I think this conversation that we're having is more about a reframe rather than an addition, right? There are opportunities for play everywhere, and everything, think about a toddler, right? I'm in toddler land right now. Everything is magical and wonderful, and there are opportunities for play everywhere. And so getting out of our to-do lists and tapping into what our children and the children around us are really interested in is a wonderful way to get into play, right? You can play by like turning on music while you're doing the dishes and dancing, right? We still have to feed ourselves. We still have to go to work. There's a lot of things we have to do, but that doesn't mean that we can't infuse this joyfulness and this presence into our everyday lives. And I think that being present, like being truly present, is one of the greatest gifts that we can give our children.
And so play is about making sense for children once again, and it's often not political or divisive by nature. So it's really a chance for them to put into practice their thoughts about their world as they absorb from their friends or family in the community, which means that sometimes they're going to say things that may go against your beliefs. Like certainly we've said some spicy things today, potentially, and you cringe. But you will probably go back and do some of that thing that we just talked about, road distancing. I hope maybe not road distancing. You probably don't want to mock your children, but awareness management or audience management, because that's our default reaction. But I believe the worst thing that we can do when children bring something to us is to shush them or interrupt them. Because what you're communicating to them is that they shouldn't notice differences. they shouldn't have thoughts or opinions. That talking about someone in a wheelchair is bad if we communicate to them, and then they're going to associate that, oh, all people in wheelchairs are bad. Because like I said, play is learning, not just for them, but it's also for you. So here's a quick example I'm going to share. A couple years ago, I was in the classroom and we're doing free play, and I heard two children in the block area. And I hear them say, yeah, let's build the wall. Now, this was during our last president, and I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, well, this is going to be interesting. I didn't rush over and I didn't say, oh, hey, stop that play. I just kind of moseyed on over, doing my thing in the classroom. And I was like, oh, hey, y'all, what's going on? Oh, what are you doing? They're like, hey, we're building this wall. We got to keep them out. And I was like, whew, all right, because they're absorbing everything that they're hearing in this world. And then I asked them, oh, well, who are you trying to keep out? And their answer floored me. They said, oh, we're trying to keep the Americans out because they're coming into our community and they're destroying it. They're leaving trash around. They're separating us. Now, when you heard that story, what were you thinking, right? It's probably we're building the wall. We got to keep Mexicans out, blah, 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 because that's the narrative that we often hear. But these children were actually Mexican. And they were like, hey, I don't want people coming and destroying my community. So you probably, we have to really recenter the child when it comes to their thoughts, their play, their emotions, because they're experiencing things for the first time. And we need to sometimes just let them process it, these things out loud. And it's going to be uncomfortable, y'all, but we can always go back to it. We can always go back and be like, hey, I heard you're building a wall. I hear it's to protect your family, but I wonder if there's a better way to do this. Because what if my family lives in your community and I wanted to come and visit them? Now I wouldn't be able to. And that makes me sad. Just like there are people who want to come here to the United States, but they can't because of this wall. And that makes them sad too. So what do you think? And from there, you can make connections to all sorts of different things. I made connections moving forward in my work to water conservation, because one child was really super interested in water conservation, and I was be able to make that connections. And so to wrap us up for the last kind of 10 minutes or so, we as a society, we spend a ton of time talking about trauma and intergenerational trauma, but we don't talk enough about healing. And so intergenerational trauma, just to ground us in our definition, is really unresolved trauma that gets passed down to one generation to another. And it can be passed on through parenting styles, relational experiences and dynamics, and epigenetics. But I want to focus on healing for our mind, body, and soul. So I come from a long line of storytellers, griots, if you're familiar with the African term. And so it's natural that the children in my community, they're natural storytellers, because stories can act as a window through which children understand and process their own experiences. And so we can use play therapy in order to break it down even further to really understand using children's natural modes of expression to communicate their inner worlds, their thoughts, their emotional tensions, or whatever that's coming up for them. And so I'm going to share really quickly just 3 ways in which I've done it. So once again, not a certified play therapist, but here's the technique that I've done with young children. I've had them, especially if they had a life-changing event when they first come into the classroom, or if someone just yelled at them and that was really traumatic for them, I might ask them, hey, let's just start with a circle on a piece of paper and tell me what that circle means. That represents that safe place for you. Where does that look like? What does that feel like? And then I say, oh, what else is coming to your mind? And so they have the freestyle just to create whatever's coming up for them. And then I take whatever that they explain to me in this photo that they draw, and then I'll share it to whomever, maybe their family, maybe someone who specializes, in order to really support them in understanding what's really behind all of this layers. And so that's a responsive measure to what I'm seeing, and I'm doing that in culturally responsive ways. Second thing is something that's kind of more preemptive, and that's through music therapy. So we listen and we dance to music, we play and we create our own music. We'll do musical storytelling rather than just listening to an audiobook during nap time. And so this is a multi-month process, um, but it's a different outlet for them to express their frustration, their aggression, or their threatening behaviors. And then it's also important for us as adults to do that as well. I do it with improv classes that I take. I'm also doing aerial silks. So I'm in the air just on all sorts of positions, right? And so it's super cool in order to have an outlet to be incredibly therapeutic. And then lastly, right, this is something that I do that's kind of in the middle of everything. And it's some consulting that I did with Seattle Children's Theater. It was a project that they call Creative Drama for Mental Wellness. And essentially, we'll ask the children, how does it feel in your body when you're sad? And then we'll walk around the room and ask them to notice it in their bodies. And we'll dissect it with them and help them recognize how it feels in their chest, how it feels in their mind, what emotions comes up. And then we'll move on after they kind of understand, like, oh, this is how it feels and looks like. Then we'll go, okay, well, here's another emotions. And then we might dance around the room to explore that feeling. And so it's just super important that we trust children and let them take the lead, especially if you're coming in as an educator or you're working with children in some sort of capacity that isn't your own. We have to understand that they are the experts of their own family. Children are not stupid, right? They're extremely right-brained, and they're picking up on emotions in people's faces and sensing what's there. And so when we don't communicate that, we got beef with our cousin and we're at the table, they're sensing that. And so we can't ask children to be communicative, to be emotionally mature, and all these things if they're constantly being told no. They're constantly not being told the elephant in the room. Amelia.
Yes. And so I think there's something so wonderful here about approaching play with curiosity and openness and really being with children, right? We know that from research that children are very attuned to our emotional states. They're paying attention to us and they're looking to us as experts. So I think there's a role for us to think about not only following child's lead, but sometimes stepping out of that expert role and being that co-explorer along with them. And I also know that we'd love to do a little bit of co-exploring with you all. And I think that we need to take some questions now. So I'm gonna move us into the questions, except I'm gonna toss it back to you, Mike, for 30 seconds. You have something more you wanna add before we answer questions?
Yeah, I just think that the best gift we can give our children is to be genuinely interested and give them our attention. And to just think about play as a dream space. So my homie and I, Dr. Mill Gilmore from, she's gonna kill me, Washington State University, even though I'm not sure I should say that because I'm from the University of Washington and we're rivals. But anyways, he and I specifically wrote about articles and do a lot of work around Black boys because we were once Black boys ourselves. But essentially, we talk a lot about dreams. And dreams, you argue, for Black children and adults are specifically important. That time we get for rest and play allows us to connect with who we are and gives us space to dream. And so dreams are a life force for Black boys. It helps, and us as adults, really helps shapes children's understanding of their place in the world. In our children's imaginations, their self-concepts, their academic aspirations can be altered based on how educators and the adults in their lives see their racialized and their gendered identities. My mom used to do this one last practice before I wrap this up. is something that I've taken into the work that I do with young children. She used to not just say, hey, who do you want to be? Things on my next slide. Instead of asking children, what do you want to be right now? She would ask them, who do you want to be right now? They kind of said that wrong, right? Instead of who do you want to be when you grow up, who do you want to be right now? And they would be like, oh, I want to be a bus driver. I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be just a good friend. And so every moment that she saw them being a really good friend, she'd go over to them and be like, you're realizing your dreams right now. You're being such a good friend. Or they're building something in the block area. She'd be like, oh, did you know in NASA, when you're working for them in the future, you're going to have to build so many different big and complex structures. And so you're being an astronaut right now. And so I leave that with you all because we have in our hands, in our spaces, the opportunities to allow children to not just realize their dreams, but also to affirm, because a lot of the work that my mom did was with immigrants and refugees, but it was, hey, letting them, when she told the story back to the parents and the caregivers, that, hey, your sacrifice in making it over here to New York was worth it. And so you're not just validating the children's dreams, but you're validating the dreams of the adults itself. So on that note, let's get to some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mike, and so much, Amelia. We have a lot of questions that we've had contributed in over before this and now during the time, and I'm going to try to smush them together to get some real punch out of this. And I have one to start with for Mike and then one for Amelia. Mike, in your role as a preschool teacher, educator of teachers, and parent counseling of parents, how do you balance promoting the nurturing power of play, but also giving space for validating negative emotions? Let's say there's a kid that just got rejected by her best friend who's going with another friend. And let's say there's a mother that is really traumatized by watching media about the war in the Middle East. We don't want to just say, oh, that's really hard, but hey, let's just heal from that and go play, because that's really dismissive of some space that needs to be given for negative emotion. So how do you counsel people to do both and of supporting play, but also giving space for negative emotions?
I mean, that goes back to us decolonizing our ideas of what play is. So many times play has to look like being in the block area or the Magnetile areas or Legos, but sometimes play also just be communication and just being with the child. And putting away all those distractions and just validating their emotions. So first and foremost, all of this goes hand in hand. Social emotional learning, decolonization, building relationships, as well as STEM and all of our traditional school subjects, they all go hand in hand. And so what we're trying to do is just acknowledge the child that they are human, that they have emotions, that, yeah, I get sad too, especially when I'm working with toddlers and 2-year-olds. They're like, what, mom, dad, cousin, why are you leaving me with this stranger for the first time on September 1st? And I can go, yeah, I get it. My mom also lives really far away and I don't get to see her either. But you know what? They always come back. What makes you feel better? Let's explore that together. Oh, that makes you feel good? That makes me feel good too. And so you're building that relationship and you're just acknowledging who they are in the moment rather than saying, this playing is more important. Go play with some blocks.
Yeah. Thank you. Amelia, thank you for all your work at iLabs and to all neuroscientists everywhere. Now that it's established, at least in our world, that play is good for cognitive development in all its ways, whether it's abstract thinking, it's creativity, it's problem solving, as well as enhancing memory and attention. I call it miracle grow in my writing. So now that that's been established, do you feel like it's being absorbed by the powers that be in school boards and schools? Because we're kind of competing with the 3 R's in STEM and STEAM, and in our with our decreased enrollment and our region here, they're kicking out recess, dance, orchestra, you name it. And so I feel like they're making it an either or, and are we making any headway on promoting play in K through 12?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I think that, it really depends on where we are. I think that there has been really this focus on trying to get everybody, sort of like caught up and catch up. If we think about like the pandemic or whatever, there's this like real focus on outcomes. And I think, unfortunately, for a really long time, we focused on outdated research or outdated ideas about what is best for children. I think that, if you talk with almost any educator, not all educators, but many educators, especially educators that work with young children, right? Like they know that children learn through play, right? That is just that, because you can't avoid it. That is just every day, right? And adults learn through play too. Older children learn through play too. And, I would hope that we're getting to a point where, and I think that maybe we're all feeling it, right? Like, and I think this is part of what Mike is talking about too. Like, we're getting this point where we have all these systems that were put in place, to try and get us to a point. And where's that point that we need to get to? Like, what is the point that we need to get to now, right? It's this sort of like more expansive space. We need to think more creatively and dynamically. We need to think about relationships. We need to think about people, and play is what gets us there. And we're kind of, my hope, and we'll see, is that we're kind of in this like cocoon phase, when you're like in the gooey middle part, when we're like, oh, I don't, like, I want to go here, and we've been here, and I'm not quite sure how to get there. I think we're in that sort of like, I'm not quite sure how to get there space. And my hope is, as there's more writing and more thought and more attention and more advocacy, that we can, get out of that little like, caterpillar cocoon and into the maybe like, maybe a little moth, maybe a little butterfly.
Yeah. Well,
So-
it gets back to your quote of Mr. Rogers, right? It is serious learning. It's the work of childhood. It builds brains. I mean, as you've demonstrated with your neuroscience presentations, it literally grows and builds those connections of neurons. But I think it's really fancy stuff. Everything you've been talking about today is really fancy stuff for building brains and mental health and social emotional learning. But I still don't think the word is getting out there. I think our viewers are more sophisticated than many school boards, to be quite honest, but don't tell anybody.
We need more people talking about like on all levels, right? Like talking about, like asking about like, why isn't there recess? Why is my kid not playing? Like, like I think if the parents has a lot of role in advocating, like, I want to see my kid play, I want to know how they're playing and being joyful throughout the day.
Yeah, and there's no question in my mind that play is healing too, because as a psychologist with little ones that are really struggling with mental health problems, I know that sometimes my therapy isn't as important as their dance group at school, right? I think that's the mental health nugget that they're getting per week. And so I'm pretty humble about how this play is working the magic, not me. And a lot of the questions that have come in have been about play or fighting among siblings, that the parents are trying to promote play between the children, use some of the difficulties for learning experiences, but end up fighting over that and ending up feeling like it's more of a punitive process sometimes. So any advice for parents struggling with kids with different ages, different temperaments, and squabbling more than good play?
I might flip it on its head. And so nothing brings siblings together than a common enemy, quote unquote. And so how can you think about redirecting their play? And so maybe you then become the bad guy, quote unquote bad guy. And you go, well, I understand you two are fighting. Maybe you're bad guys. What if you're teaming up against me? How would that look? How would you work together? And so it's a little shift to how that game might be played and how their interactions might be, as well as I'm big about just being in the community and doing a lot of community events to help them see themselves as, oh, we're in this together. This is blood, right? And nothing's gonna get in between that. And also, I also think maybe I'm a little biased because I beat up my older brother. At least that's the story I'm going with. Hopefully he's not listening. And so I also think that's also very healthy to have in that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been given the high sign. So you've been very generous with your time and with your invitation that people can email questions after the event, which is super kind. I want to really thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. I want to thank all the viewers and the media partners. And if you haven't signed up for the rest of the series, you can still do so. And next time on February 6th, we have an event entitled Conscious, Curious, Connected Discipline Strategies for Happier, Healthier Kids. And it's on February 6th. So thanks again to everybody.